The funeral hall was still, the kind of silence that pressed against your chest and made it hard to breathe. Mrs. Grace had just passed away, and the air in the room felt thick with expectation, fear, and, though few would admit it, relief. The family, standing stiffly around the casket, looked like they had been rehearsing this moment for years, but none of them expected this. At the front of the room, in front of all the mourners, stood a small boy, no more than 10, wearing torn clothes, his feet nearly bare. He trembled as he held an envelope, Mrs. Grace's will. The grand, imposing figures in the room, her heirs, washed with eyes wide open, mouths slightly agape. There was a deep, palpable confusion that rippled through the gathered crowd. Why was a child, of all people, reading the will? The air seemed to thicken. The boy's hands shook as he looked down at the words that would forever change the fate of everyone in the room. His breath quickened, and for a moment, he looked as though he might drop the will and run. He hadn't expected to be in this position, but here he was. As he opened the envelope, the eyes of the room followed his every move. The silence was deafening. Was he supposed to read this aloud? The boy's throat tightened, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm supposed to read the will. But the words caught in his throat as he saw the family's faces twist with confusion. Anna Claire, Mrs. Grace's daughter, was the first to react. She stepped forward, annoyance dripping from her words. "This is a joke, right? You're the one chosen to read Mom's will," she sneered, eyeing the child like he was nothing more than an inconvenience. Owen, her brother, smirked and crossed his arms, his eyes scanning the boy from head to toe. "What's this about? The will's supposed to be read by a lawyer, not some street kid." But the boy didn't flinch. His small hands gripped the paper tighter. It was hard to tell if he was shaking from fear or the coldness of the room, or maybe it was both. There was something about the look on his face, something desperate, something human, that made the wealthy family pause, just for a second. With a deep breath, the boy straightened his back and began to read. "To my beloved family, my dear children, Anna Claire and Owen, and my sister, Velma." His voice trembled, but the words tumbled out. "I leave everything behind. But not as you think." The family exchanged confused glances. Anna Claire's eyebrows knitted together as she leaned in, her mouth moving to whisper something to her brother, but she stopped herself. The boy continued, "There is someone else who will read my will, not you. This is my final request. It's not about you, my dear children. It's about him." The room froze. The boy's words cut through the air, heavy and suffocating. The audience held their breath. Was this a mistake? Had someone misinterpreted Mrs. Grace's wishes? Everyone looked at each other, unsure of how to react. But before they could question further, the boy's voice shook again. I'm supposed to be here." But just as the child was about to read further, something unexpected happened. Bam! The door to the hall swung open, and the lawyer, Edward, walked in, his face stoic as usual, but with a visible tension in his step. The air seemed to thicken around him as he quickly strode towards the front. "Stop," Edward said, holding up a hand. "There is something you need to know." He turned to the heirs, his gaze locking with each of them, his tone now serious and final. "Mrs. Grace's will was not meant to be read by any of you." A ripple of shock spread through the room. The boy's wide eyes darted between the family and the lawyer, his heart hammering in his chest. What was going to happen now? Edward paused for a moment, his voice dropping even lower. "The woman you called family, the woman you claimed to mourn, she wanted him to read it." And with that, the boy's heart stopped. The lawyer turned to the child, and with a deep breath, said, You are the one who will reveal the truth." The silence that followed Edward's declaration was thick, as if the very air itself was holding its breath. The boy, still standing at the front, could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him. An entire room of strangers, most of them wealthy and influential, now looking at him like he was some kind of tool. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to matter. But there he was. Anna Claire's eyes narrowed with suspicion as she glanced at her brother. Owen's usual smug demeanor seemed to falter for a split second. Velma, however, remained strangely calm, though her lips curled into a tight, controlled smile, hiding whatever emotions were roiling inside her. None of them had expected this. None of them had expected him. The boy's hands gripped the will tighter, and he swallowed hard. His heart was thudding so loudly in his chest that it almost drowned out the sound of his own breath. He'd never imagined that something like this would happen, that he would be the one to read the will at a millionaire's funeral. He was just a street kid, a nobody. But here, in this grand hall full of high society, he was the key to their futures. He glanced down at the document in his hands, trying to steady his shaking fingers. His voice was a thin whisper when he started again, though it carried in the heavy silence. Mrs. Grace, she wanted me to read this because I'm the one she trusted. The family, they didn't know. There it was, an admission of something darker than anyone in that room had expected. Edward nodded slowly, confirming the boy's words. She knew what would happen, he said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that was felt throughout the hall. She understood who was really there for her, and who wasn't. A murmur swept through the guests, but they quickly fell silent as the boy continued reading. To my children and my sister, you have been my family, and I love you. But in these final moments, I see things more clearly than ever. Your lives have been filled with luxury, but I feel I have failed you in ways I cannot take back. The boy's voice faltered again as he looked at the next line. What could she possibly have meant by that? He took a deep breath and forced himself to continue. I have left each of you something, but my greatest gift is not in money. It is a lesson I have learned too late, one that I hope you'll understand in time. Your true worth is not measured by what you have, but by the love and respect you give and receive. The room was still, the tension hanging in the air, suffocating the once celebratory atmosphere. It was hard to tell what anyone was thinking, but there was no mistaking the ripple of discomfort that ran through the family. I don't understand, Anna Claire whispered, her voice sharp with frustration. What is she talking about? The love and respect we give? She gave us everything. We have nothing left to prove. Her words cut through the silence like a knife. Owen stepped forward, his tone defensive. Yeah, we did what we could. This doesn't make any sense. Why leave us with? Before he could finish, Edward raised his hand, cutting him off with the same calm authority he had maintained throughout the reading. Please, Edward said, his voice laced with exhaustion. Let him finish. The boy nodded, his throat tight. There was no escaping the weight of the words in front of him. The family's discomfort was palpable, but there was something else, something deeper, fear. They feared the truth that was about to be laid bare. To my sister, Velma, you have been my closest companion in life, yet I have watched you grow cold, calculating, and distant. You once had a kind heart, but it seems I have failed to remind you of that. The estate is yours, if you can prove you are still capable of caring for others, of putting aside your greed and selfishness. If you fail, I have made arrangements for the fortune to go elsewhere, to someone who understands its true value. The boy's voice trembled as he read the final words, the weight of them hanging in the air like a sword over Velma's head. She flinched slightly, but quickly regained her composure. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, and then, like a dam breaking, all the heirs began to speak at once. What do you mean by elsewhere? Who else could she possibly be talking about? Prove we can care? She was always the one who needed help. Velma stood motionless, her face like stone. Her eyes never left the boy, and for the first time, there was a crack in her cold exterior. There's more, the boy said softly, lifting his eyes from the page. His words sent a fresh wave of shock through the room. To my children, Anna Claire and Owen, you have been my greatest disappointment. I gave you everything you wanted, but I failed to give you what you needed most, a sense of purpose, humility, and love. The estate will not be divided as you expect. In fact, your inheritance will be minimal. A collective gasp echoed through the room, but it was nothing compared to the stunned silence that followed. The boy's voice trembled as he looked up from the final words. There's no mistake, he said softly. Mrs. Grace knew this day would come. The funeral hall was filled with the kind of uncomfortable silence that made the walls seem closer. The boy, still standing at the front, felt like the weight of the world was on his small shoulders. He had been thrust into this strange, unexpected role, reading a will at a millionaire's funeral, of all things. His eyes swept the room, landing on the faces of the heirs, none of whom seemed to expect what was about to unfold. But there was more to this moment. There was a history behind it, a journey that had led him here. Before we continue, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and tell us where you're watching from. Earlier that day, when the phone call had come, the boy, Michael, had been sitting on a street corner near a bustling cafe, the usual noise of the city filling his ears. He had been used to the sounds of the streets, the laughter, the horns, the scuffle of shoes on cracked sidewalks. But today, something was different. A woman's voice, kind but firm, had reached him. "Michael, dear, it's time." He had never been one for surprises, especially ones that could change his life. He had known Mrs. Grace for a while, though she didn't know him the way her family did. She was a regular at the local food bank, but unlike the others who passed by, her gaze always lingered on him. She would smile, a smile that spoke of something he couldn't quite understand. It was as if she saw more than just the street kid with ragged clothes and dirt-streaked skin. But that day, the smile had been different. When she spoke, there had been a calm urgency to her words. "Michael, I want you at the funeral today. I need you to read something important for me." The words hadn't made sense at first. Why him? He was just a boy with nothing to his name, living day to day, barely scraping by. But Mrs. Grace's voice had been unwavering, and for some reason, he had felt compelled to follow her instructions. What was so special about today? Why had she asked him, a poor street boy, to be the one to reveal her final wishes? When he had arrived at the funeral, the grand mansion with its towering columns had been more than he could process. He had never seen so many suits and expensive shoes, nor had he ever imagined being in a place where the air smelled like polished wood and fresh flowers. It all felt so out of place, as if he didn't belong. Yet, here he was, standing at the front of this room, holding the will that would change everything. But the journey hadn't been easy. He had been on the streets for as long as he could remember, surviving day by day, always on the move. He'd learned early that the world wasn't kind to people like him. He'd learned not to ask for help, not to rely on anyone, because the world only took. But there was something about Mrs. Grace that had been different. Her kindness had stood out amidst the cold indifference of everyone else. She had treated him like a person, not a charity case. She had seen something in him, something that no one else had. Now, as he stood there, holding the will in his hands, he couldn't help but feel the enormity of the task. Mrs. Grace had trusted him to carry out her final wish. What had been the turning point for her to choose him over her own family? The heirs, standing in the front row, looked at him with confusion, disbelief, and a hint of impatience. Anna Claire's expression was one of disdain, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. Owen, her brother, had a mocking glint in his eyes, though there was a flicker of uncertainty beneath it. And Velma, their aunt, watched him like a hawk, calculating, cautious, and waiting for something he couldn't quite identify. Edward, the lawyer, who had been so calm through all of this, now stepped forward. His gaze met the boys briefly before he turned to face the family. "You have heard the will, but there is more to this story," Edward said, his voice steady but filled with the gravity of the situation. The family was tense now, each member waiting for the next words. The boy could feel the air thickening around him, but it wasn't just the family that was on edge. He felt it too. He was caught between his loyalty to Mrs. Grace and the weight of the truth he was about to reveal. "What are you talking about?" Anna Claire snapped, unable to keep her composure. "This is ridiculous. She left us everything, didn't she? What else is there to say?" But Edward didn't waver. "It's about Velma," he said, his voice firm as he turned toward the woman in question. "It's about her role in Mrs. Grace's life." Velma's eyes narrowed, her lips tightening into a thin line. The others fell silent. The boy, his heart racing, tried to focus on the words he had to read next, but his mind was spinning. He turned his attention back to the will, his voice quieter now, as if the words themselves carried a weight he hadn't anticipated. "To my dearest sister Velma, you have always been my closest companion, but there are things you must know. I have seen the darkness in you, the greed and manipulation, and I have come to realize it's not just the family that has suffered because of you. It's also the world, and I am leaving this estate with the hope that you will find redemption before it's too late. This is not about punishing you. It's about waking you up to what really matters. It's time to let go of your bitterness and learn to love. You have one last chance to prove yourself. If you fail, everything will be given to the boy who has stood by me in my final days." The room seemed to stop, and all eyes were on Velma. She remained still, though the tension in her face was evident. She hadn't expected this. No one had. The boy let the words hang in the air as he read the final lines. It was a twist that no one had seen coming, not even him. But the truth was out, and there was no going back now. The tension in the room was suffocating, as if the very walls of the mansion had closed in on everyone. The heirs' faces were a mix of disbelief and anger. The boy, Michael, stood frozen at the front, holding the will, his heart pounding with the weight of what had just unfolded. The reading was far from over, but already, the truth had begun to tear at the seams of the family. Anna Claire's eyes darted back and forth between the others, her face twisted in disbelief. Owen, her older brother, looked like he was about to explode, his jaw clenching with suppressed rage. And Velma was still silent, her usually composed face betraying only a brief flicker of vulnerability. The boy tried to ignore them, but the weight of the situation felt like it was crushing him. He had never wanted any of this. He wasn't even supposed to be here. He was just a hungry street kid trying to survive. But Mrs. Grace, her kindness, her generosity, had changed the course of his life. And now, he was the one who had to expose the family's deepest secrets. Flashback to the day before the funeral. Michael had been wandering the city streets, trying to avoid the stares and whispers that followed him everywhere. He had no place to go, no one to turn to. He had learned long ago to rely on his own, to find food when he could, to sleep where he could. But that day, a message came, a strange message that had found its way to him through an old acquaintance. "Mrs. Grace wants to see you." The words had been so out of place, so unexpected, that Michael almost didn't believe it. Mrs. Grace, the wealthy woman who always showed him kindness at the food bank? She wanted to see him? Why? When he arrived at her mansion, the grand building towering above him, he felt like he didn't belong. The ornate gates creaked open, and the butler greeted him with a kind but curious look. Inside, Mrs. Grace had been waiting. Her face, though weakened by illness, lit up when she saw him. She looked so frail, like a shadow of the woman who had once stood tall and strong. She had asked him to sit down with her, and they talked for what felt like hours. "Michael," she said, her voice soft but filled with purpose, "I have one last task for you. I need you to read my will. It's important, and it must be you. Not my children, not my sister. You." Michael hadn't understood at first. Why him? What did he have to do with her will, her legacy? But her gaze had been unwavering, her request clear. "You've always been kind," she had told him. "And when my family turns away from me, I'll need someone who understands what it means to care." Now, standing in front of the family at the funeral, Michael felt the weight of those words. It wasn't just about reading a will anymore. It was about something deeper, a truth that was beginning to tear the family apart. He looked down at the page in his hands, the last words that Mrs. Grace had entrusted to him. The next part of the will was even more shocking than the first. As he read aloud, his voice steady, he could feel the eyes of the heirs boring into him. "To my beloved children, Anna Claire and Owen, you have been my pride and joy. But I fear I have failed you in many ways. You have been raised in a world of luxury and excess, but you have never known the true value of love. I leave you my fortune, but only if you can prove to me that you are capable of loving one another. This will is conditional. If you do not show love, if you continue down the path of selfishness and greed, everything will be taken from you. And it will go to someone who has already shown more heart and compassion than either of you ever could." A chill ran through the room as the boy's voice faltered. Anna Claire's face twisted in anger, her fists clenched at her sides. "This is absurd," she spat. "We've been the ones who've supported her, given her everything. She wouldn't leave us nothing." But Edward, standing behind the boy, stepped forward. "She didn't leave you nothing. She left you a choice." Michael's fingers trembled as he flipped to the next page. The room seemed to fall away as he continued reading. "To my sister, Velma, you have been my closest companion, but your heart has grown cold. You have manipulated those around you for your own gain, and it pains me to say that you have lost sight of what truly matters. I leave you nothing, Velma. You have shown me time and time again that you are incapable of love, but there is one last chance for you. Prove to me that you can change, that you can care for others as I once believed you could. If you fail, your portion of the estate will go to Michael, the boy who understands what it means to give." A gasp echoed through the room. Velma's face drained of color, her eyes wide with shock. She took a step back, her hand gripping the back of a chair for support. What does that mean?" Velma whispered, her voice cracking. Why him? Why him?" The boy's heart raced. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected to be the one who would change the fate of this family. But as he looked at Velma, at Anna Claire, at Owen, he saw the greed, the hunger in their eyes. The same hunger that had driven them to this moment. The room was silent as he finished reading. His voice trembled slightly as he whispered the final line. The estate will go to Michael, the child who understands what love truly is. The one who, despite his hardships, has a heart that can heal. The silence was deafening. Anna Claire, Owen, and Velma stood frozen, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and rage. Michael could feel their eyes on him. He was just a boy, a homeless child. But now, in this moment, he was the one who held the power. He had done nothing to earn it. He had simply been in the right place at the right time. But now, it seemed that fate had chosen him to be the one to hold the key to Mrs. Grace's legacy. The family remained silent, each one lost in their thoughts, trying to process the shocking words that had just been revealed. Michael, still standing at the front of the room, could feel their anger seeping through the air. It was suffocating, but it was nothing compared to the storm that was brewing within him. He had never wanted any of this. He had never wanted the power, the fortune, the responsibility. All he had wanted was a place to belong, a sense of safety, and perhaps just a little love. But now, standing in front of these people, these heirs, these strangers who claimed to be family, he was the one who held the key to everything. And it terrified him. The tension in the room was unbearable. Velma, Anna Claire, and Owen were still reeling from the shock of Mrs. Grace's final words, their eyes darting between each other, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and rage. Anna Claire's voice broke the silence, sharp and full of venom. This is a joke, right? You can't be serious. You really think this street rat deserves the estate over us? Over me? Her voice cracked with anger, but there was a flicker of fear hiding beneath it. Owen, always the more cynical of the two, crossed his arms. It's a farce. That one was rigged. This kid, he doesn't deserve anything. His eyes narrowed as he glanced at Michael, who was still holding the will, the weight of the room pressing down on him like never before. Velma, standing to the side, said nothing. But her face, so often composed and controlled, betrayed her. She was no longer the confident, calculating woman she had once been. She was vulnerable. She was losing. But it was Edward, the lawyer, who finally stepped forward, cutting through the tension. His expression was somber, his voice steady as he addressed the family. You don't understand, he said, his voice soft but firm. This was never about money or property. Mrs. Grace's last wish wasn't just about who would inherit her fortune. It was about something much bigger. It was about love and loyalty. The words hit like a wave. Anna Claire, Owen, and Velma turned toward Edward, confused. But Michael, still standing at the front, felt a strange sense of clarity. He had been right all along. Mrs. Grace had seen something in him, something that none of them had. He wasn't just a street kid. He was the one who had understood the true meaning of what she had wanted. Edward continued, his gaze moving between the family and the boy. You've all been blind to the most important thing in life, the thing that Mrs. Grace held dear. You thought you could buy everything. You thought wealth and status would shield you from the truth. But it was never about money. It was about what you could give to others. Velma, her voice cracking with emotion, finally spoke. She wanted him. She wanted this boy. Her face flushed with a mix of humiliation and anger. I've been by her side all these years. I supported her. I helped her build everything. And she leaves me nothing. Michael didn't answer. He couldn't. He had no words to explain why he had been chosen. All he knew was that Mrs. Grace had seen something in him that had been buried deep inside her family. A sincerity, a purity that the others couldn't see because they were too focused on themselves. He glanced down at the will one last time. There was no turning back now. The truth had been exposed. The family had been given a choice to change, to learn the value of love over wealth, of loyalty over greed. But the question remained, would they? To Michael, the will read, I leave not just my fortune, but my hope. May you use it wisely. May you show the world that love is the greatest inheritance of all. To my family, I leave this, the chance to change. If you prove yourselves worthy, you will find what you truly seek. But if you choose to remain in your ways, you will lose it all. The weight of those words settled into the room like a final sentence, a final judgment. The family stared at each other in silence, the realization settling over them that their world, everything they had known, was about to change. Anna Claire's face softened for the first time since the reading began. For a fleeting moment, Michael thought she might break down. but it was gone as quickly as it had come. She stood taller, her hands clenched into fists. "This isn't over," she muttered under her breath, her voice low but filled with determination. "I'll find a way. I'll fix this." Owen, ever the skeptic, smirked but said nothing. Velma, her eyes narrowing, took a step toward Michael, her expression unreadable. "You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into, boy," she said, her voice colder now than ever. "This fortune isn't yours to keep. You're just a pawn in this game, and we always win in the end." But Michael didn't flinch. He didn't back down. He had done what Mrs. Grace had asked. He had spoken the truth, and now he had to live with it. For the first time, he realized that it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the meaning behind it. The family would have to decide whether they would continue down the path of greed and selfishness or choose something else. But he knew one thing for sure. The estate wasn't his to keep, it was his to pass on. And as he stood in the funeral hall, staring at the faces of the people who should have cared for him, he wondered if they would ever understand. As the family began to disperse, leaving the room in a haze of uncertainty and bitterness, Michael walked out into the fresh air, the cold wind brushing against his face. For the first time, he didn't feel like a nobody. He didn't feel invisible. He had been the one to hold the truth, and he would carry it forward, no matter what came next.